I wanted to make a few preliminary comments before we begin our activity today. Uh, and this goes back to the very beginning of our effort to restore our American government to full function. When we went to Europe, we found out from the Europeans that our government was supposedly an interregnum. Now, this is not even possible. Our government is vested in the people of this country. And as long as there are people in this country who are claiming their birthright as Americans, there is no way for our country to ever be without a government, by definition. So we began researching these claims that our government was an interregnum, and we found out that other governments, other principals that are under contract to provide us with essential governmental services had made this false claim against our government, and that they had in fact breached our trust and had committed fraud and trespass against us. And this was done for their advantage. This set us off on a very long trail of investigation that has brought us to today. One of the things that we discovered is that they began using our assets, our gold and silver, our land, even our bodies and our labor, as assets that they could use as collateral and create credit for themselves and their operations. Now, this is, of course, illegal. This is, of course, unlawful. This is a trespass. We also found that they had done other things that trespassed against us and against our government in terms of usurpation and in terms of misrepresentation and impersonation for profit. Crimes of personage are very serious. They entail an identity theft. And it's not that much different from identity theft that you are familiar with credit card hackers. In fact, it's very similar. Someone pretends to be you and steals your identity, accesses your credit, makes a bunch of charges, and leaves you to pay the debt. This is essentially what our subcontractors, our federal subcontractors, have done. They have impersonated us individually and at a national level. This is a national level identity theft that has been ongoing in various stages and forms since the end of the Civil War. This brings us to another point. We found out that these same perpetrators have promoted a state of war, a presumed state of war. And they've done this not only with an excuse that the Civil War was never officially finished and ended with a peace treaty, but they have also done the same thing with the First World War, the Second World War, the Korean conflict, and Vietnam. They've left all of these different wars and commercial mercenary conflicts open, and they've continued to make charges related to these wars even as long as 157 years after hostilities ended. Now, this is obviously fraud. This is obviously fiduciary malfeasance, and this is obviously the kind of oversight that warmongers and defense contractors have taken full advantage of for decades. It's up to us, the living people of the world, to say no, to put an end to this criminality, to put an end to these wars, and put an end to those institutions and organizations that have promoted this fraud against us, against Americans, and, as we subsequently found out, against Europeans too. As a result of this perpetual war theory, we find that the European nations are largely still occupied by American and Allied forces. They're still under occupation by NATO, 75 years after hostilities ended. This has to come to an end. And if any organization is responsible for not putting an end to it, it's the United Nations. Unfortunately, the United Nations set up peace accords after the Second World War that require everyone that was part of the war, every party, every national government that was part of the war, must sign the peace proclamations and treaties before it can be declared ended. This is supremely impractical and indeed impossible. Many of the countries that participated in the Second World War no longer exist. For example, Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia, they're no longer on the map. There's no longer anyone competent to come forward and sign for them. And so we are faced with a specter of eternal war brought to you by the UN in its peacekeeping capacity. This is an oversight, a mistake, who knows? It's something that has to be addressed by those countries that are still in operation and by the people of this world who have the good sense to realize that this cannot be left in this condition. Also, there are countries that still exist that are not organized. We found that the Kingdom of Prussia technically still exists, and it is not organized at this time to be able to come forward and sign any kind of a peace proclamation or peace treaty. So, for all these reasons, it is important for the people of the world to wake up, look around you, and see what's going on. You have to make the effort to pay attention to what governments and supposed institutions of higher learning and all of the officials affiliated with these organizations are doing. You need to look at the Bar Association and look very, very carefully, because what you're going to find is that the bar associations have been used to promote injustice and unlawful activity all around the globe. You're going to find that the doctors and nurses that we trust and rely upon have been conscripted illegally as licensed doctors, not physicians, and that these fine legal terms and coded definitions have been used by the bar associations to promote injustice and to exert coercive force that is actually unlawful. We have people all over the world who are being exposed to prosecution of various kinds, evictions, claims of fraud, claims of indebtedness that don't exist. They're being brought forward under conditions of personage and barratry. These are the two primary crimes that have been used to create these false claims, and then the false claims have been implemented and prosecuted by the bar associations. These false prosecutions have led to trillions of dollars of private property being confiscated illegally. And many, many people have been incarcerated in quote-unquote federal jails and in military jails and in franchise operations, which are just like Dairy Queen franchises of large corporations in the business of providing governmental services. All of this activity is illegal and unlawful. All of it needs to come to a stop. All of the assumptions that these corporations have made need to be reversed, and the people need to stand up and make it so. If we don't, we will be facing what I call corporate feudalism. the corporations will claim to own you body and soul as chattel property that they control. They've already tried to do this once by seizing upon your name and estate and working the fraud that we uncovered. And we have good reason to believe that they are in the process of doing the same thing by a slightly different route. GMOs. And they have already ruled in their courts that GMOs can be patented and owned by whomever created that particular little piece of genetic engineering. Let's make it perfectly clear. As a living man or woman, and those are terms they have managed to mess up, but I am using it in the common sense. You are not owned by anyone, and it is against the public law to even make the suggestion that you are. Both slavery and peonage of any kind has been outlawed worldwide since 1926. We must uphold the public law, not the private law. We are responsible. It is our public duty as the public to uphold the public law. And anyone who says otherwise is lying to you. All right? It's just that simple. Public law, public duty. We are the public. The living people, the general populace of every country are the public. And it's our responsibility in this topsy-turvy world that these crazy people have created to enforce the law. You will find, if you research it, that all of these agencies and supposed law enforcement organizations, from the local sheriff's office to the county police to the state police to the National Guard, have all been privatized and are now owned and run by separate criminal corporations operating in breach of trust. They are presenting themselves as public institutions doing public work, and they are receiving public money, but they are actually being operated as private corporations. And as a result, those in charge of the corporations direct them to do whatever is profitable and whatever is expedient for them. You will find case law in their case law, not ours. And I want to make that clear too. There's public law, and then there is what they call private law. Statutory law, codes, regulations, mandates, all of those sorts of things are not public law. They are quote-unquote private law. They are the law of corporations. And the corporations actually have no ability to address you because you are not an employee of those corporations. Instead, you are the employer of those corporations. All right? So they're taking your money. They're giving the responsibility to private corporations. Those private middlemen are then misdirecting their employees to do and think and be whatever they want at your expense. And as a result, we have a situation where some places we have good administration, some places we have horrible administration. And it's because of the middlemen that have been interjected into the process and who now stand between the people, who are the employers, and the employees. It's easy to see how these middlemen get in there and they misdirect the employees, tell the employees whatever they want to tell the employees. And so we have people out on the streets thinking that they are policemen and that they have a right to enforce the law. And yet what they're enforcing are the private laws of corporations against individuals who have no relationship to these corporations, who are not employees of these corporations, who are not dependents of these corporations, who have no reason in the world to even be aware of these corporations and how they have been mismanaged and sold off and turned into private institutions that are acting under color of law as if they were public institutions and public police forces. These are all problems that are shared throughout the entire planet. These corporatists, I will call them, have engineered a situation where everybody has been harmed. Everybody has been basically defrauded. You've been defrauded of your lawful government. You've been defrauded of your public law. And along with that, you've been defrauded of your actual identity and your rights, freedoms, and property interests. They have literally seized upon you, another word for latching upon you, which is illegal, and they have impersonated you, often as people belonging to a completely different nationality. Let me give you an example. In this country, you're born as an American in a state. Each state is a separate sovereign entity, just like a separate country. When you look at a map of this country, America, what you should see are 50 separate individual countries, and they operate together as a federation of states. They have mutually shared powers, that they have donated to a holding company, the unincorporated Federation of States, which has been doing business as the United States of America since 1776. All right? That's what you should see. And when we are born in this country, each one of us assumes our nationality from the place of our birth. I am a Wisconsinite. Someone else might be a Minnesotan. Someone else might be a New Yorker. Someone else might be a Texan. But we assume our nationality from our state. We do not have anything like a national nationality. There is no such thing for us as United States citizenship. All right? Now, there are people who work for us, federal subcontractors, who, though they may have been born in this country, adopt a different political status. They adopt that political status so that they can work as foreign subcontractors. All right? These are the United States citizens, the U.S. citizens with a capital C, and the municipal citizens of the United States with a small c on citizen. 3 different federal subcontractors. One is an American subcontractor that has not been operating since 1860. One is a British territorial subcontractor, and one is a subcontractor that is run by the Holy See. At the time that the contract was completed in 1790, it was under the auspices of the Holy Roman Empire, but throughout all of this, the Holy See has been in control and under contract to provide certain services to our country. So I want to make it clear at this point that the American government, which I represent as a fiduciary, has been in existence since 1776. It operates in international jurisdiction, and it is separate from the federal government. We are, in fact, the people that contracted with the Holy See and with the British territorial government, monarch, and the government of Westminster, and the government of Belgium. And you will find that there are treaties that are established at the end of the Revolutionary War, the War of Independence, however you want to describe it, which ended in 1783. You will find that those treaties are implemented by the constitutions. There is a direct cause and effect. The constitutions are a consequence of the treaties and the peace process that ended the War of Independence. And they are a separate category of contract. A constitution, by definition, is a debt agreement in which one party agrees to pay and one party agrees to serve. All of those constitutional agreements, all three federal constitutions and all three federal subcontractors are obligated by that same contracting process. It was our states that contracted for the services. We are the employers of the federal government. We are the ones that hold the contracts with the British monarch, the government of Westminster, the government in Belgium that results in the treaties of Ghent. We are the ones that hold all of the contracts that are expressed as the constitutions. There is absolutely no doubt that we are the employers, and they are the subcontractors. Unfortunately, our subcontractors did something that is basically illegal. They pawned their responsibilities off on other subcontractors. And now those other subcontractors have failed to perform, have performed in a criminal manner, and the principals, the governments responsible for this, the foreign principals responsible for this, are trying to evade their responsibility. They have allowed these various subcontractors of our subcontractors to run rampant here, to do all of these illegal things, to set up these impersonation and identity substitution schemes, to set up all of these foreign courts and misaddress Americans and bring them into these foreign courts for the purposes of illegally confiscating their assets. They've done this to us individually, and they've done this to us as a nation. And it's all illegal. Let me give you an example. If I turn to someone and say, okay, I'll contract with you to do a specific job for me. That's what our entire country did in terms of the constitutions. We contracted with them via the constitutions to perform specific enumerated services, and we then gave them the enumerated powers to exercise those services. These are very simple concepts. Everybody can understand how you contract with someone to do a job, right? Well, in our case, it was an entire country that was contracting with other countries to do specific work, other governments. What happens if, for whatever reason, the person that I originally contracted with then turns and says, oh, I don't want to do this job myself. I'm going to subcontract it to somebody else. So now Joe is employing Harry to do Joe's work. And, Harry goes off on a rampage, creates murder and mayhem, steals, pillages, plunders, breaches the trust, trespasses against the public law. Who is responsible for that? Well, obviously, the guy that I originally contracted to do the job in the first place is responsible for the misadministration of his workers. And that is precisely what's gone on here. The Holy See, the government of Westminster, the Queen's government, the government of Ghent, and others that were responsible for their employees hired corporations to do their work for them. Those corporations subsequently committed all these crimes, all these acts of impersonation, all this fraud, all this violence, and then they went bankrupt, claiming that we were chattel for their debts. And our land, our soil, our gold, our silver, everything was chattel for their debts, so that we became debtors by their default, or at least that's their theory. We have a different take on it. So far as we're concerned, the subcontractor of our subcontractor went belly up. They went bankrupt. So what? It has nothing to do with us. It's the responsibility of those who hired those people in the first place, and it's their fault, the other principals to the constitutional contracts. It's on them. Just like it would be on Joe, who I hired to mow my lawn, who gave the job to Kevin, who botched it. It's the same principle. It's the same thing, except it's at a national level. Just like the identity theft, which has been staged against the Americans by all of those calling themselves the United States. The United States technically is a corporation, at least in that sense that they use those words. Okay? So, now we get down to today and the money issues. We find that in 1934, a number of maneuvers, let's call them maneuvers, were made by Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was the President of the United States of America, Incorporated, which is one of the subcontractors, a British territorial subcontractor to be exact. FDR did a number of things that, from any rational viewpoint, were extremely criminal. I know that's going to be a disappointment to many people who idolized this man, but the things that he did to our country were criminal. For starters, he enslaved the municipal population by impersonating people as things and issuing clearinghouse certificates, birth certificates, against them and against their resources and assets. This was somewhat announced during his first inaugural address, which is couched in very religious terms. Take a look at the text of his first inaugural address, and you will see where he actually says that this is what's going on. He is selling a purported interest in living people, the citizenry of the municipality, and he's issuing clearinghouse certificates against them, against their good name. This was the beginning and the backdrop for a more generalized process of registration, false registration, that did the same thing to millions of Americans. This birth registration process is a commercial process. Registration involves giving something up to whatever organization it's registered with. And you can now see that millions and millions of American babies have been misrepresented as municipal citizenry, slaves, owned by these corporations and have had citizenship obligations conferred upon them using the same presumptions that FDR created then. So we now have the prospect of slavery being reintroduced into the modern world where it's been outlawed since 1926. And you may ask how they got away with this. Well, when they impersonate people as citizens, they have created an office, a title, and the living man disappears behind this facade of a title. So they were actually, technically, legally, but not lawfully, attaching a title to each one of us. And they were then trading these titles and issuing these certificates against those names. This has created a situation in which living people have been plundered as corporations. And they're not corporations. They were never even made aware that any of this was going on behind their backs. Millions, billions of people have been defrauded by this evil system. And part of the evil was that they seized upon our gold and silver to pay their debts. So, in 1934, they issued gold bearer bonds. This began a practice that has continued through to the present day. They issued gold bearer bonds. The corporations, calling themselves the United States of America Incorporated, issued gold bearer bonds against our gold, the unincorporated United States of America. Now, it's our gold. It was always our gold. And they got away with taking it offshore and placing it in safekeeping by claiming a custodial interest, a trust interest, that in fact does not exist. You can read any one of the constitutions and see exactly what their duties are. It does not include taking our gold or our silver or putting it anywhere. They are not responsible for that. Now, they have taken leave of their senses as of 1934 and issued gold bearer bonds against our gold assets, which they cashiered in the Philippines. The United States Navy has all the receipts. We have the receipts. We can show what they did. They took our gold, transported it to the Philippines for quote-unquote safekeeping, and then in 1934 they issued all these gold bearer bonds against our gold resources in the Philippines. 152 quote-unquote baby boxes, which I will show you examples of, were issued. Each one contains a letter purporting to confer global immunity on the carrier and the receiver of these bonds. Each one contains 250 of the bearer bonds, and they are each for $100 million in 1934 terms. As bearer bonds, they can be cashed by the bearer against the Filipino government and the reserves held in the Philippines. However, that is not how they have used these bonds. What they've done is they have put them in banks as cash assets as the equivalent of gold. And they have used them to underwrite the banks. They have used them to issue credit. And of course, under the fractional reserve banking system that they conveniently set up for themselves, they can issue 10 times the credit than the asset backing the credit. So you have one apple in the warehouse, and you've got 10 guys out there with a warehouse certificate for the same apple. Do I have to explain that this is a fraudulent system, that it is legalized gambling, and that it results in a completely untenable situation? Now we have a mess to clean up on a worldwide basis. And it has been created by our military, failing its duty to protect and serve, by our politicians, acting as criminals in office, by the ignorance of the people that have accepted this as if it were something that made sense, when in fact it does not and never did. We all have a share of guilt here. Whether you were one of the perpetrators or you were one of the victims, it has to end. And it has to end here and now.